The Special Bond. On 18 May 2007, at Diergaarde Blijdorp Zoo in Rotterdam, Bokito, an 11-year-old male gorilla, escaped from his enclosure and went straight for Petronella Yvonne de Horde, a 57-year-old regular who visited several times a week and believed she'd built a friendship with him through the glass, smiling and holding his gaze. Zoo staff say that steady eye contact reads to a silverback as a challenge. Bokito crossed the water moat, and an electrified barrier that the zoo believed would prevent any gorilla from escaping. Once free, he ignored the crowd and went straight for Yvonne. He grabbed her, dragged her across the zoo restaurant terrace into the building, and bit her more than 100 times, shattering her hand and breaking bones before vets brought him down with a tranquilizer dart. She survived, then sued the zoo. One open door. Catalina Fernanda Torres Ibarra, a 21-year-old Chilean guide and maintenance worker, was sent to clean the Big Cat sector at Parque Safari Rancagua, about 56 miles south of Santiago. On the morning of August 6, 2021, standard practice was simple: tigers locked in their cages before anyone entered to clean. She walked into the enclosure not knowing a Bengal tiger was loose in that sector. The cage door had been left open, and nobody had warned her or the young cleaning crew. The tiger attacked the instant she was inside, tearing at her neck. Security staff pulled her out and tried to resuscitate her. Fire crews and paramedics arrived, but she died at the scene from the neck wounds. In 2023, a court in Rancagua convicted park owner Ivan Sanchez Lobos and operations manager Pablo Sanchez Reyes of quasi-unintentional homicide over the death. The feeding time. During feeding time on the 10th of April, 2009, a 32-year-old German woman climbed over the outer fence and barrier at Berlin Zoo and jumped into the moat of the polar bear enclosure that housed 4 adult bears, including the celebrity bear Canoe. She landed in the water among the bears at the busiest possible moment. One of the older bears, not Canoe, lunged, bit her repeatedly on her arms and legs, and kept pulling her back into the water as keepers scrambled. Staff jabbed at the bears with long poles and threw meat to distract them, and with firefighters and ropes finally hauled her out over the barrier. She survived, needing emergency surgery for serious bite wounds. Police issued her a citation for trespassing while she was still in the hospital. The bear faced no consequences, and the zoo, calling the barriers adequate, announced it would not change its security policy. Icee. On the 28th of March, 1990, Lori Stober, a 25-year-old keeper with 7 years at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio, was working the polar bear tunnel and walked past the den of a male polar bear named Icee, weighing 700 to 800 pounds. As she passed, she reached toward the bars to offer him a grape. Her fingers came close enough for the bear to grab them in his teeth. He pulled her arm into the cage and chewed it almost to the elbow before biting the forearm off, which freed her from his grip. A coworker applied a tourniquet, which a surgeon later said kept her from bleeding to death. She survived, permanently disabled, having lost her right arm below the elbow. The insect repellent. On the 12th of September, 2023, a 33-year-old female keeper was doing routine work in the rhinoceros enclosure at Salzburg Zoo Hellbrunn, in the Palace Gardens in Salzburg, Austria, when she was attacked. She was carrying out routine work in the rhino enclosure when the animal attacked her for reasons that remain unclear. Jetty, a 30-year-old female rhino with no history of dangerous behavior, attacked during the procedure. A 34-year-old male colleague tried to intervene and was also attacked, suffering a broken leg. She was probably trampled, suffering severe chest trauma, and died at the scene despite resuscitation. Police treated it as an accident during routine work, with no charges reported, and the zoo director could only offer that maybe there had been some kind of irritation. The chairs from the café. On the 5th of November 2017, Nadezhda, an experienced Russian zookeeper who had worked at Kaliningrad Zoo for around 20 years, was doing routine feeding and cleaning in the tiger enclosure, alongside Typhoon, a 16-year-old Amur tiger who had never previously attacked a human or shown aggression to zoo staff. She believed he was locked in his cage. The inner holding door had been left unsecured. Typhoon came up behind her, knocked her down, and pinned her, biting and clawing while she screamed. What stopped him wasn't staff or tranquilizers. Visitors watching from behind the barrier shouted, hurled stones, and threw cafe chairs and tables into the enclosure until the tiger backed off long enough for her to reach a back room. She survived with multiple bite and claw wounds to her body and face, listed critical but stable, her life not in danger. Police opened a criminal investigation, and the zoo confirmed one rule had been broken. Keeper and tiger were never supposed to share the enclosure. Not an attack. Dawn Therese Brancho, a 40-year-old American trainer with about 15 years at SeaWorld Orlando, was leading a Dîner with Shamu session on the 24th of February 2010, with guests eating behind glass while she rubbed and interacted with Tilikum, a bull orca of roughly 12,000 pounds. Tilikum had already been linked to 2 earlier human deaths. During a post-show session at the pool's edge, he pulled her into the water. SeaWorld said he grabbed her ponytail. Eyewitnesses said he seized her left forearm. Either way, he dragged her under, thrashed her, and would not release her, scalping her and severing an arm. The medical examiner ruled she died of multiple traumatic injuries and drowning, with a fractured jaw, fractured vertebrae, dislocated joints, and broken ribs. SeaWorld officials characterized the incident as a tragic accident rather than an intentional attack. Within the guidelines, John Philip Bradford, a 62-year-old American who'd worked at Dickerson Park Zoo in Springfield, Missouri, for about 30 years and managed its elephants for 25, was moving a 41-year-old Asian elephant named Patience into a restraint chute for a training and feeding session around 8:45 a.m. on October 11, 2013. Patience had a history of aggression, and 2 other keepers were with him. She hesitated in the roughly 12-foot chute. Bradford reached in with a guide tool to coax her forward. Patience lunged with her head and trunk, knocking him backward into the closed gate behind him, then crushed him with her head for about 5 seconds until keepers pulled her off. The city investigation concluded he died from traumatic injuries after the elephant pushed and crushed him against a gate, and found he had been acting within his training guidelines. That was the finding that mattered. The rules were followed. The Mariupol lions. Leocadia Paravolova, a 41-year-old Russian keeper who'd worked with big cats for 17 years and was called the soul of Taigan Safari Park in Russian-occupied Crimea, was cleaning a lion enclosure on the 16th of October, 2024, containing animals she had not raised, when 3 lions entered through an internal door whose latch was not secured. Protocol required locking the internal safety door between the 2 compartments before entering. According to the Russian Investigative Committee, she left the latch unsecured. The 3 lions pushed through and mauled her. Visitors were still in the park, but no one heard her. By the time staff reached her, she was dead. A criminal case opened for violating occupational safety requirements, with no final verdict reported. The park owner, Oleg Zubkov, refused to euthanize the lions, saying lions don't overlook errors. It was the evening of March 25, 2017. 25-year-old Akbar Salubiro went out to harvest palm oil near his village in central Sulawesi, Indonesia. He never came back. That night, some villagers said they heard faint, strange cries from the grove, but in the heavy darkness, no one could find where they came from. 2 days later, the search ended in horror. On the ground lay a massive reticulated python, over 7 meters long, around 23 feet. Its midsection bulged unnaturally. Through the stretched skin, you could see the outline of a human body, and at one end, the tips of Akbar's boots. The villagers killed the snake, and in front of a silent crowd, cut it open. Inside, Akbar was still fully clothed, his body crushed but intact. This became the first fully documented case in history of a reticulated python swallowing an adult human, complete with photos and video that went viral worldwide. His wife wasn't even home that night. She found out what happened from those same viral photos. Experts believe it wasn't random. As palm oil plantations replace rainforest, giant pythons lose their prey and territory, forcing them into closer contact with people. Reticulated pythons are the world's longest snakes, ambushing prey before coiling around it to stop blood flow, then swallowing it whole. His last moments likely began with a sudden strike to his legs, followed by the crushing coils tightening around his chest, until he could no longer breathe. Then came the slow, deliberate swallowing that pythons are built for. It was the morning of April 28, 2016, when 23-year-old Alex Bessler and his friend Sonia set out for a short hike on Arizona's Merkle Trail. The desert air was still, the sun warm, until a dark shape appeared in the sky. At first it seemed like a cloud, but within seconds it was buzzing, swirling, and charging straight at them. They were Africanized killer bees, and they weren't looking to scare anyone off. Sonia sprinted away, shouting for Alex to run, but the swarm was faster. Hundreds of bees clung to his face, neck, and arms, while thousands more hovered and struck at every patch of skin they could find. The pain was instant and brutal, each sting like a hot needle pressing into his skin. Then it multiplied again and again until it felt like the air itself had turned into stingers. His body began to swell, burn, and itch all at once. Breathing grew harder, his chest tight, his throat starting to close. Park rangers and hikers rushed to help but couldn't get close. The bees attacked anyone who came near. Even with protective gear and leaf blowers to push them back, the swarm barely thinned. By the time rescuers reached Alex, he had been stung over 1,000 times. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his body shutting down from the sheer volume of venom. The official cause of death: multiple organ failure and respiratory arrest from massive envenomation and anaphylactic shock. In minutes, the venom had overwhelmed his system, collapsing his organs and stopping his breathing. For Arizona, the tragedy was a wake-up call. Warning signs soon appeared at trailheads, advising hikers how to spot and avoid bee activity. But for Sonia, who escaped only to watch her friend consumed by that swarm, it was a moment she could never forget. Spring, 2024, a quiet rural road in Russia. A group of friends pull over by a small river. Near the bank sits a massive, sturdy-built beaver. Someone laughs, "Let's get a selfie." One man edges closer, then closer still, until he actually tries to lift the animal. The beaver explodes in fury. It twists, clamping its chisel-like teeth into his thigh. The sound is a raw, sickening crack, like a tree branch snapping, except it's flesh and maybe bone. Imagine a steel hammer with a razor edge slamming into your leg, cutting straight to the bone in a single strike. Blood erupts instantly, hot and fast. The beaver has severed the femoral artery, a direct pipeline from the heart that can drain a person's life in under 2 minutes. The man stumbles back, eyes wide in shock, the ground beneath him turning dark red. His friends scream, hauling him toward the car, but the blood gushes like an open tap. He grows pale, weak, and within moments loses consciousness. By the time they reach the nearest village, it's over. Fatal beaver attacks are almost unheard of, but these animals will defend themselves, especially in spring when they guard their territory and young. On September 21st, 2014, 22-year-old Darsh Patel was hiking with 4 friends in the Apshawa Preserve, West Milford, New Jersey, a place locals thought they knew well. Black bears were common here, but fatal encounters, never. Midway along the trail, the group spotted a large black bear about 100 feet away. Instead of leaving immediately, curiosity took over. They began snapping photos. Darsh snapped several selfies as the bear edged closer, each frame showing it filling more and more of the shot. They eventually turned to walk away, but the bear kept following. When it closed to within 5 meters, about 16 feet, fear turned to panic. Someone shouted to run. That split-second choice would prove fatal. Running can flip a predator's instinct into overdrive. To a bear, it's not fear it sees, it's prey fleeing. Darsh was soon separated from his friends. Imagine sprinting through thick woods, breath fogging in the cool air, every rustle behind you sending a spike of terror through your chest. Then, footfalls heavier than your own. The ground starts to tremble. Black bears can hit 30 miles an hour. The impact is like a battering ram, the claws like hooked knives, the jaws able to crush bone. 2 hours later, search teams found Darsh's body, torn and lifeless, with the bear still circling and guarding it. Police had to shoot the animal on the spot. The attack shocked New Jersey. It was the first fatal bear encounter ever recorded in the state, despite its dense bear population. Remember, even one wrong instinct can make the difference between going home and not coming back. Cynthia Dikama, 61, and her husband, Keith, paddled a 14-foot canoe through Tiger Creek near Lake Kissimmee on a warm May morning in 2025. The water was barely 2.5 feet deep, so still it mirrored the sky like a perfect sheet of glass. Then, an eruption. They had unknowingly glided over an 11-foot, 4-inch alligator. In a single explosive surge, the reptile heaved upward, slamming into the canoe and flipping it like a toy. Both were hurled into the water. Cynthia came down directly on top of the gator. In that instant, before she could scream, it clamped its jaws around her torso. The pressure was unimaginable, as if an iron vise was crushing her ribs inward while serrated teeth tore into flesh. She was yanked under so fast that her last view was the fractured sunlight above, shattering into bubbles. Keith lunged toward the swirl, his hands grasping only empty water as the ripples closed. The massive shape lingered below, circling, while Keith fought his way to shore, yelling for help. By afternoon, rescue divers recovered Cynthia's body, still close to where the gator prowled. Wildlife officers trapped 2 large alligators from the area, but all evidence pointed to that 11-foot brute. Experts believe it wasn't hunger, but territorial fury in spring mating season that triggered the attack. It was January 26, 2001, Pacific Heights, San Francisco. Diane Whipple, 33, a celebrated lacrosse coach, stood in the narrow hallway outside her apartment, juggling grocery bags, keys clinking in her hand. From the opposite end of the hall came Marjorie Knoller, straining to hold back 2 massive Presa Canarios, Bane, a 130-pound brute of muscle, and Hera, slightly smaller but just as intimidating. The hallway was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass. Then, an explosion of power. Bane lunged, his jaws locked on Diane's neck. Hera tore at her clothing, teeth finding flesh. The sound was a sickening mix. Deep growls, tearing fabric, and Diane's screams echoing off the plaster walls. She fought back, but every movement only triggered another bite. Presa Canarios have jaws like steel traps, designed to hold, crush, and not let go. In minutes, her body was covered in over 75 wounds, sparing only her scalp and the soles of her feet. She bled heavily, the metallic scent filling the air. By the time rescuers reached her, she was barely conscious. In the ER, doctors fought to replace the blood pouring from her shredded arteries, but the trauma was too great. She was pronounced dead. The horror didn't end in that hallway. Bane and Hera belonged to Knoller and her husband, Robert Noel, but the dogs had been raised for intimidation, linked to a violent Aryan Brotherhood member serving time. Neighbors had called them dogs of death. Diane herself had told friends she felt unsafe near them. Bane was euthanized immediately after the attack. Hera, a year later. Knoller was convicted of second-degree murder on the rare legal principle of implied malice. Noel was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The case rewrote California's dangerous dog laws. You know how people say nature is peaceful? Yeah, not always. Because out in the Russian Far East, a place that looks like it was carved straight out of a survival horror movie, one 19-year-old girl named Olga Moskalyova learned the hard way that the wild doesn't forgive mistakes. It was late August 2011. Olga and her stepfather Igor Tsiganenkov decided to go fishing near the village of Termalny, not far from Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. To them, it was just a normal trip. They'd done this before. Rivers full of salmon, quiet forests, cool air. It felt like freedom. But those same rivers, yeah, you know what's coming. They're also where the bears feed. So when a mother brown bear and her 3 cubs came out of the woods, it wasn't some cute National Geographic moment. It was a death sentence. The mother lunged first, straight for Igor. The force of the impact broke his neck instantly, skull crushed, gone in seconds. Olga saw everything, and honestly, I promise you that if you had to choose if you were Olga or Igor, you have chosen Igor. Because what happens next, bro? I mean, that was pure nightmare fuel. Olga runs, barefoot. You can almost hear the panic. Branches snapping, her breath getting shorter, that pounding heartbeat that's louder than her own footsteps. The forest suddenly feels alive. Not in a good way, in a "this place wants me dead" kind of way. But bears? They're not slow, clumsy cartoon animals. Nah, they can hit 35 miles an hour easy. You're not outrunning that. You could be Usain Bolt with jet engines. Still not making it. So, needless to say, she doesn't get very far. The bear catches her, grabs her leg, yanks her down, and the sound she must have made. I don't even want to imagine it. Dirt in her mouth, claws in her back, pure chaos. And somehow, she still manages to pull out her phone. Think about that. While being mauled, she's dialing her mom. Tatiana answers, probably expecting a normal.
Эй, мы уже едем домой.
Instead, she gets,
Мама, медведь меня ест. Мама, это такая боль. Мама, помоги.
At first, Tatiana's like, okay, this has to be a joke. Her daughter was known for pranking her. But then she hears it. That low, guttural growl, the sound of tearing, that wet, awful chewing sound, and she realizes her daughter isn't kidding. So she calls Igor's phone, no answer, obviously, he's already gone. Then Olga calls again. Her voice is shaking, weaker now.
Мама, медведи вернулись. Она пришла снова и привела 3 детенышей. Они меня едят.
Bro, can you even process that? Like, she's narrating her own death in real time, and her mom can't do anything. She's miles away, completely powerless. That's the kind of horror no movie could ever replicate. By the third call, Olga's voice changes.
Мама, больше не больно. Я не чувствую боли. Прости меня за все. Я тебя очень люблю.
And that's it. The line goes dead. By the time rescuers show up, it's too late. The mother bear and her cubs are still there, still eating Igor. Olga's body is nearby, torn apart. It's the kind of scene that burns itself into your brain forever. Emergency services didn't hesitate. They called in hunters, ordered them to track and kill the mother bear and her cubs. Tatjana never recovered. She said her daughter had just gotten her driver's license, had plans to become a psychologist. All that potential, gone. Because in the wilderness, you don't get plot armor. You either respect it, or it eats you. In November of 1992, 4 friends dropped into a cave called Banshee Hole, tucked deep in the forests of eastern Tennessee. They thought it'd be just another weekend adventure. Ropes, mud, a few good stories to tell later, but it turned into something else entirely. The entrance alone was enough to make your stomach drop, a 95-foot vertical shaft disappearing straight into blackness. Standing at the edge, you could feel the cold air rising from below, like the cave was breathing. It wasn't the most dangerous spot in the region, but it wasn't a place for beginners either, and that's where things started to go wrong. One of the guys, the least experienced of the group, had never actually done a vertical descent before. He'd read about it, practiced knots on trees, and figured he could handle the real thing. That optimism, it kills a lot of people in caves. He went first, rappelling nearly 100 feet down into the dark. At first, everything was fine. They explored a few tunnels, crawled through tight spaces, got muddy, typical caver stuff. But when it was time to climb back up, he volunteered to go first again. He'd built his own chest harness from nylon webbing, no seat support, nothing to distribute his weight. Basically, a DIY straitjacket. He started inching his way up using mechanical ascenders, little metal grips that slide upward but lock when they're weighted. It worked fine until he hit the lip near the top, where the shaft flares outward. To get past that spot, you have to pull yourself over with your upper body strength, but his setup was all wrong. Every time he tried to move, the chest harness cinched tighter around his ribs. He could barely breathe. The others heard the change in his breathing first. Shallow, panicked, echoing down the shaft. They climbed up to help, pushing from below, trying to adjust the webbing, but every tug only made it worse. One of them had to climb out to get help. By the time rescuers arrived, about 40 minutes later, he'd been hanging there for hours. They set up a pulley system, got him over the edge, but as soon as they pulled him free, his body went limp. He never regained consciousness. The official cause of death was positional asphyxia. Basically, the harness crushed his chest so tightly he couldn't draw air. It's one of those tragedies that's almost too frustrating to think about because it was preventable. The man didn't die in a collapse or a flood. He suffocated inside his own gear, fully aware of what was happening, and that's what sticks with rescuers even now. Max Thomas, 60, wasn't an amateur camper. He knew the woods, knew the risks, and figured he'd be fine for one more night near Sam's Throne, a quiet stretch of forest where the Ozarks feel endless. Just him, his gear, and the kind of silence most people pay to escape to. Earlier that day, he texted his family a few photos. A black bear had wandered near his campsite. And before I go on, you've got to understand something about black bears. They're not small, cuddly, or even always black. They can weigh anywhere between 200 and 600 pounds, and the big males, they can hit close to 700. And their claws, bro, those things are no joke. About 2 inches long, curved like knives, built for climbing trees or tearing open logs. Or, if it comes to it, a person. So, back to Max. Earlier that day, Max had messaged his family a few pictures from the site. In one of them, the bear can be seen passing close to his tent, calm, quiet, watching him from just a few yards away. Looking at that photo, you can't help but think, what the hell was he doing just standing there? A bear that close isn't some cool wilderness moment. It's a death wish. Maybe he thought it made for a badass shot. Either way, that picture feels less like a memory, and more like a warning. Fast forward a few hours, and then the messages just stopped. Yep, you already know where this is heading. When his family couldn't reach him, deputies went looking. What they found wasn't peaceful anymore. Max's campsite was torn apart, tent ripped, cooler smashed, drag marks streaking into the woods. He was found several yards away, brutally mauled. The medical examiner later said it outright, death by animal mauling, the kind of phrasing that doesn't leave much room for imagination. Investigators believe the bear attacked as Max was packing up. Maybe startled, maybe just fearless. This bear wasn't afraid of people. It had been seen wandering near other campers, caught on trail cameras acting like it owned the place. After the attack, investigators compared this exact photo to the bear they later tracked down. Same size, same pale markings on the face, even the same patch of forest. Sheriff Glenn Wheeler confirmed it, saying, "We knew the bear in the photos was a male, and this one is too. It matches the size and facial colorations, not to mention it was right back in the same area." A few days later, wildlife officers located the bear and made the call to euthanize it. It was a decision that split opinions. Some said it was necessary, others called it unfair, because in the end, the bear wasn't trespassing on his land. He was in his. It was living exactly where it always had, long before Max ever pitched his tent beneath those trees. August 18th, 2022, Southern Oregon. A 25-year-old wildland firefighter heads out before dawn with his crew. Lightning storms had rolled through the night before, sparking new fires across Josephine County. The air still smelled like rain and smoke, that weird mix of calm and danger. By mid-afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., the crew was in the Rum Creek area, taking a short pause to plan their next move. No chainsaws running, no trees being cut, just a moment of quiet. And then, out of nowhere, crack. A nearby pine, tall, green, and full of life at first glance, suddenly gave way from the inside. There was no warning, no slow creak that would have sent anyone running. It just broke. The sound was sharp, like thunder cracking right above your head, and before anyone could react, the tree came crashing down. It hit the 25-year-old directly. The forest, which had been quiet a moment earlier, exploded into noise. Shouts, radios crackling, the scrape of boots on dirt as everyone sprinted toward him. They get him out fast, call for emergency evac, do everything right, but it's no use. The tree had already done its damage. Later, investigators found out that same tree had actually been struck by lightning before. It looked perfectly fine on the outside. Green needles, solid bark, but inside it was completely fire-scarred, rotted out like a burned matchstick. And that's what blows my mind every time. This thing looked alive. You'd never know it was basically a wooden landmine waiting for someone to stand in the wrong spot. Jordan Lindsey. A tropical vacation. Crystal clear, turquoise water. A family snorkeling together in a place that looks like a postcard. It's the image of paradise. But what happens when that paradise becomes a hunting ground? This is the story of Jordan Lindsey, and the day her family's dream vacation turned into a real-time nightmare. In June 2019, 21-year-old Jordan Lindsey was in the Bahamas with her family. On a whim, she and her mother joined a last-minute snorkeling tour to Rose Island, a popular spot known for its calm, shallow waters. They were in the water, enjoying the scenery, when they drifted a short distance from the main group. There was no guide in the water with them. Suddenly, sharks appeared. Not one, but at least 3. According to her family, there was no warning shouted from the boat. The first anyone knew of the danger was when the sharks were already there. Jordan was hit first. As her mother Cammie swam to her, Jordan screamed, "Mom, there's another shark coming!" before a second shark slammed into her leg. It was a coordinated, multi-animal attack. What followed was an act of pure maternal desperation. With no help from the tour staff, Cammie physically dragged her bleeding daughter back towards the shore, fighting off the sharks as they continued to attack. Jordan's right arm was completely severed. Her other arms, legs, and buttocks were torn apart. She was pulled from the water alive, but the blood loss was catastrophic. She was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The family later criticized the tour company, Sandy Toes, for having no guides in the water and for their slow reaction. The case is a horrifying reminder that the ocean is not a swimming pool. It is a wilderness. And sometimes we are reminded of that in the most brutal way imaginable. Gloria Serge. There are some 911 calls you can never unhear. The panic, the disbelief, the raw terror of someone watching a tragedy unfold in real time. This is one of those stories. It didn't happen in the wild jungles of the Amazon or the plains of the Serengeti. Nope. It happened in a manicured, peaceful retirement community in Florida during a routine afternoon dog walk. On February 20th, 2023, 85-year-old Gloria Serge was walking her small dog along the edge of a retention pond in the Spanish Lakes Fairways community in Fort Pierce. It was something she did every day. But on this day, a nearly 11-foot alligator was waiting. It lunged from the water, initially going for the dog. Gloria, in a protective instinct, tried to pull her pet to safety. A neighbor, looking out her bedroom window, saw the struggle and called 911. The audio from that call is chilling.
An alligator has a woman!
She screams at the dispatcher.
It's too late! It's too late! Oh my God!
The neighbor watched, helpless, as the massive reptile dragged the elderly woman into the lake. Gloria briefly surfaced, trying to swim away, but the alligator was too powerful. The neighbor tried to extend a pole to her, but it was no use.
It's too late!
The neighbor says on the call, her voice filled with horror. Gloria Serge was pulled under and drowned. Her body was recovered later that day. The alligator was captured and euthanized by wildlife officials, and parts of Gloria's body were reportedly found inside it. The entire incident was captured on surveillance video. This case is so disturbing because of its setting. A quiet, serene pond behind a retirement home, a place that feels safe, suddenly becomes the scene of a prehistoric ambush. Michael Packard. On June 11, 2021, Michael Packard, a 56-year-old veteran lobster diver, was on a routine dive in Cape Cod Bay. He was about 33 feet down when he felt a huge bump, and everything went completely dark. He thought he'd been attacked by a great white shark, a common fear for divers in the area. But he felt no teeth, just immense pressure all around him. He realized, to his horror, that he was inside the mouth of a humpback whale. Like, bro, you went to work to catch lobsters, and a whale caught you. That's not even on the job description. Okay, so for about 30 to 40 seconds, Packard was trapped. He could feel the whale's powerful muscles contracting. He was convinced he was going to die, suffocated or crushed inside the animal. He thought of his wife and his 2 young sons. He was breathing from his scuba gear, but he didn't know for how long. He struggled, and the whale seemed to get more agitated. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The whale surfaced, violently shook its head back and forth, and spat him out. His crewmate, who had been watching the water in confusion, saw him burst out of the ocean next to the whale and hauled him back onto the boat. Incredibly, Packard escaped with just bruises and soft tissue damage, no broken bones. Marine biologists explained that it was a freak accident. The whale was lunge feeding on a school of fish and simply engulfed Packard by mistake. A humpback's throat is too small to actually swallow a human. But for 30 seconds, Michael Packard lived out the biblical myth of Jonah in the most terrifying way possible. Akbar Salubiro. In March 2017, Akbar Salubiro, a 25-year-old palm oil harvester, went out to work on a plantation on the island of Sulawesi, Indonesia. When he didn't return home that evening, his family and friends grew worried. They organized a search party and began combing the area. They found something unsettling: a massive 23-foot-long reticulated python, so bloated it could barely move. In the back of the snake, they could see the distinct outline of a pair of boots. Their worst fears were realized. They killed the snake and, with a long hunting knife, began to slice open its belly. The scene, which was captured on video and quickly went viral, is the stuff of nightmares. As they cut through the snake's skin, the shape of a human body becomes clear. They pull, and out slides the fully intact body of Akbar Salubiro, still wearing his shorts and boots. He had been swallowed whole. Experts believe the python likely ambushed him, crushing him to death through constriction before beginning the slow, horrifying process of swallowing him head first. The snake's jaws would have dislocated to accommodate his body, which was then folded inside the snake's stomach. The video is one of the most disturbing things you can find online, not just because it's graphic, but because it's so surreal. It's a childhood boogeyman story made real, a documented case of a human being becoming prey in the most primal way imaginable. Lon Lee Alle. In May 2017, 50-year-old Singaporean backpacker Lon Lee Alle was visiting Komodo Island in Indonesia. To save money, he decided to skip the official guided tours and stay with local villagers. On the day of the attack, he followed some locals into an area where Komodo dragons were feeding on goats and pigs. He wanted to get some close-up photos. The villagers warned him repeatedly, do not get close, especially not when they are feeding. Komodo dragons are apex predators with a venomous bite. They are not theme park attractions. Alle ignored the warnings. He moved closer to the group of feeding dragons. One of the massive lizards suddenly lunged and clamped down on his left leg. It tore into his flesh as he tried to pull away. The villagers rushed in, beating the dragon back, and managed to free him. He was evacuated by a military speedboat to a hospital, suffering from severe, deep wounds. He survived, but the story went global as a cautionary tale. The head of the national park publicly criticized him, saying he had risked his life for the sake of your budget. The irony is thick. In an attempt to save a few dollars on a guide, he ended up with a massive hospital bill and a permanent reminder of what happens when you treat a 150-pound venomous lizard like an Instagram prop. It's a case of cheap tourism meeting brutal, prehistoric reality. The Texas Rattlesnake Man. In June of 2018, a man and his wife were doing yard work at their home near Corpus Christi, Texas, when they spotted a 4-foot rattlesnake. Acting to protect his wife, the man grabbed a shovel and with a single strike decapitated the snake. The head was severed completely from the body. The threat, it seemed, was over. He bent down to dispose of the remains. As he reached for the severed head, the unthinkable happened. The head, completely detached from its body, suddenly struck. It lunged forward and bit him on the hand, injecting a massive dose of venom. Within minutes, he began to suffer seizures. He lost his vision. His condition deteriorated so rapidly that he had to be airlifted to a hospital. Doctors were unsure if he would survive. The bite from the severed head was actually more severe than a normal bite. A living snake can control how much venom it injects, but in a post-mortem reflex, the head released its full, deadly payload. He was given huge quantities of antivenom, and, after 24 hours in critical condition, he pulled through. Herpetologists later explained that a snake's bite reflex can persist for hours after death. Its nervous system doesn't require a brain to fire off one last, desperate attack. The story is a bizarre, almost comical, but ultimately horrifying example of nature's last laugh. It's a case where the monster was well and truly dead, but its head still had one last bite. Thanks so much for rocking with the channel for real. Hit that subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss a single one. And got a topic you want me to dig into next? Drop it in the comments.